Hello and welcome back to PhD Life in Norway. In our last episode, we talked about the leap from academia into industry with Dr. Davit. Today, we're looking at what it means to stay, to lead, and to advocate. Our guest today has been a fixture of the research community here in Gjøvik for over 8 years. He is currently a guest researcher at NTNU, specializing in the appearance of things. Welcome, Dr. Davit Gigilashvili.
Thank you for inviting me, Banu.
I'd just like to ask you if you could give an elevator pitch version of what you are interested in and what your research encompasses to our listeners who may or may not be someone familiar with your area of research.
Sure, that would be my pleasure. I have worked on 2 very different topics in my postdoc. So the first project I worked is the virtual reconstruction of archaeological textiles. Archaeologists found the textiles from the Viking Age, and these textiles have different figures and they are telling us some stories from the Viking times. But because the textiles are very fragmented, we cannot really comprehend what story they are trying to tell us. So we here at the Colourlab are trying to put these pieces together. So the process very much resembles jigsaw puzzle solving, which I'm sure everyone has solved at some points. We need to fit the pieces together and try to make the sense of the entire scene. But what makes this so much different from jigsaw puzzle solving is that our problem is we have a lot of pieces that are missing and the remaining ones are broken and they do not fit together. Sometimes they are faded and we do not see clearly what they represent. And most importantly, we have no way of saying whether whatever solution our algorithms give is correct or not. But we're trying our best as computer scientists to make the lives of archaeologists easier and at least make the process a little bit faster. So far, it's been already like more than 4 years we have been working on this, and we developed a software where archaeologists can load the fragments, archaeological fragments, and play with them and move them around on a virtual canvas. And this is already very helpful because you can't do that with physical fragments. They are very fragile and we need to take good care of them. So with the software, we can virtually try different positions, different arrangements, etc. But now what I'm especially interested in and what my research is primarily about is to use computer science and machine learning to identify features that would tell us whether the fragments belong together or not. Considering how complex that data is, I do not foresee that this would ever be fully automated process that machine can give the ready-made solutions. But if at least the machine could support archaeologists and could support humans in this process, that would be already a huge step forward. The second topic I work on is material appearance. Look around you now and imagine any object. You understand that they are made of specific materials, like something is wooden, something is ceramic or plastic. And you also know how to interact with them. Something looks fragile, soft, or hard. But like we never really think how we understand these properties just by looking at them. We have no way of knowing all the physics and optics behind and calculating all these objective physical properties. We simply deduce this by the visual information. But how exactly? How do you know that this is paper and this is wood? And I'm especially interested in 2 attributes, glossiness or shininess and translucency. Now we're opening Pandora box because there are disagreements on definitions across communities, across researchers and dictionaries, technical, scientific literature, whether you speak of them as an optical property, because those are rooted in optical phenomena, how light gets reflected, how light scatters in the subsurface and propagates through the matter, or whether we talk about them as purely perceptual properties. But the gloss, to explain in simple words, is defined as the reflections of the environment perceived as superimposed on a surface. And then there can be different natures of gloss, like specular gloss, where clearly you see specular reflections and these highlights, right, or for instance, the distinctness of image gloss, like how sharp the image that is reflected. Sometimes you see a clear picture, sometimes you see reflected image is a bit blurry. One extreme would be the mirror, where you see the perfect reflection of the environment.
Right.
But we see all these different types of gloss with everyday objects. So if you have a look at a vase in your room, you see that it's shiny and it has these very bright areas that is reflecting the environment. Or if you have a glass or a cup, and the wet fruits are also glossy, where you see some of the specularity. For instance, when you wash the apple, you see these bright spots across its surface that is reflecting light. And we have different types of gloss, as I mentioned. For instance, one is sheen, shininess at grazing, like low angles across near the surface plane. So if you have a look at your table and move your head towards its surface, you see that at some angle, its surface starts to shine.
Yeah. Okay.
Or another way gloss is expressed is absence of texture. If you have a marble tile, when the light is hitting it directly at some angle, you don't see this marble texture pattern because it's all white, it's all saturated. This is very big in automotive as well, like car finishes. Some metallic paints are very shiny, some are matte, they just are very blurry and do not show this angular dependence when you look at that. Also for translucency, because in some languages there is no distinction between transparency and translucency. This is a spectrum in my understanding. Some people may not agree with that, but we have transparency as one extreme where you can see through clearly and light goes through the material without any significant scattering. And you have full opacity on the other end where there is no light going through the material. And you have translucency covering everything in between, where you don't see the background very clearly behind the object, but you see that the light still manages to travel through the object. So it can be slightly blurry, like tinted or etched glass, or it can be something that completely obscures the background, but you still see through the light going through, for instance, milk, a glass of milk. Think of jade or wax or milk or essentially any edible product. You see that the light is penetrating the material and it's going through it, but we don't really understand how we know this. You see it shiny and you know this is a reflection from the environment, but it doesn't look as a part of the texture that is painted on top of the object, but we see that it's either light going through or the light reflecting the environment on the object. And how do we exactly know this is a big open question we need to answer, because right now it's very complicated to predict how any product will look to human eye. Even if you measure optical properties of the material, see in different variables, it's still very hard to foresee how this will be perceived by humans. So how this research has been historically done was that different images with different properties were shown, laboratory conditions under controlled lighting on a display that was calibrated, and then the researchers tried to link these properties with the perception. So we asked different questions to observers, which one is glossier, etc., and then try to find these links. But the key novelty, PhD, and continued in my postdoc, is that we tried to take this into more realistic conditions, because that's how we learn since birth, and that's how we interact with the environment. So we need to touch the objects, we need to move them, we need to interact with the environment to really understand what they are. So we conducted an experiment where we gave a bunch of objects to the observers, asked them to do whatever they wanted, and we videotaped the process to analyze their behavior, how they really do this. For example, I'll bring a simple example. To judge gloss, people very often rely on motion. So they pick the object and they tilt it to see how the reflections move.
Right.
And naturally, if you want to evaluate how glossy something is, you really move a little bit to see. And also for translucency, when they were asked to judge how translucent or transparent something is, they picked it up and looked for the light source, either the sun outside, the sunlight from the window, or the light bulb in the room, and looked through the object, because when the objects are lit from behind, it's usually when their translucency or light transmission is exhibited to a greatest extent. So we collected these kind of behavioral patterns to understand how we really do this very surprisingly robust, but also like very challenging task.
That's extremely fascinating. So glossiness and translucence, how did you decide, okay, this is something I really want to pursue? Because you mentioned you did that for your PhD. Was there something specific that led you to this path or something that interests you towards the property?
Material appearance is a logical and natural continuation of color. Color science as a field is relatively well established and studied for more than a century now, and I'm a color scientist by training. But when we talk of like real objects and materials in the real 3D world settings, we need to think of more properties than just color. Because like color, for instance, often measures just a point color and assumes uniformity over surface. While in reality, imagine a simple scenario. You say something is red, but it can be red and opaque or red and translucent. It can be red and very matte and uniform, or red and very glossy. And this color doesn't tell the full story. So when we talk about how objects and materials look, we need to think of other additional properties in addition to color. And when I was graduating from my master's as a color scientist, there was this very interesting and fascinating project, Move Up, measuring and understanding visual appearance at the Colourlab. And there was a position I applied for and I got the position, but the exact topic was not defined yet. So I started reading literature about gloss, texture, different properties. But I was fascinated by translucency because it was the most understudied one. So there were very few papers about translucency back then. And that's a huge opportunity, but also a challenge at the same time. So there is a huge room to do things, but also you have very little prior knowledge to rely on.
Now I'm even more fascinated about your origin story because you said you're a color scientist by trade. Was it in your master's that you found out about the field? Were you involved in it even before that?
I was born and raised in Georgia, Tbilisi, and I studied my bachelor's in computer science and information technologies there. But I always wanted to study abroad and get this international experience, spend some time abroad. But to be honest, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to study until the very last minute. So I applied for many different things, and my number one priority was cybersecurity, actually, in the US. And I got admitted to the NYU and University of Columbia, and the government of Georgia back then had a program which funded studying abroad if you were admitted at one of the world's top universities. And I was hoping that this program would support me. But then due to very frustrating, some bureaucratic procedures, so because of that, I could not get that. And then I had to consider other options. And as a backup plan, I had applied to Color Science Erasmus Master's program, which was called C.O.S.I, Color in Science and Industry. There were other computer science programs in Europe, but I decided to go with C.O.S.I. First, because I found it topic-wise very fascinating, a little bit niche, but still very interesting that not many people do. And if you have unique expertise, you also become more valuable. And this is a time when the dress image went viral. Do you remember that? The iconic image that some people, like even today, every time I show it in my classroom, there is always like almost always 50-50 division in the audience. Some perceive it as blue and black, and some perceive it white and gold. So our audience now, like listening to this podcast, if you have not seen that, just Google the dress and write what colors do you see. So this was really literally mind-blowing. And that's when I realized that, color is something super interesting to study and something that has a lot of room to really explore. Generally, if you are not in color science, you don't even understand why we need to study color. So I know my colors, I know what is red and green. Why do I need to do all of this? But then there are whole bunch of super fascinating questions about mysteries of our visual system that you can really explore.
C.O.S.I is a very fascinating program, but it's a very specific program with 4 different universities.
That's correct. You spend different semesters in different universities. So this also changes from year to year. When I was there, I started in France and then moved to Spain. And in the 3rd semester, I had to choose between Norway, Gjøvik, and Finland, and I came here. That's how I ended up here. In the 4th semester, actually, you have full freedom to find the right place to do your master thesis. Some people go to companies, some people go to other countries. And in my case, I went to the US, to the University of Washington in Seattle. And I worked on denoising of medical images, microscopy images.
Wow.
What cybersecurity or color or everything I applied for had in common was still like computer science and data science as a fundamental underlying basis for everything. But when I started C.O.S.I, I knew very little about color. All my color thinking was in RGB, but there is a lot more than that, especially when we talk about color perception. And color is essentially a perceptual attribute. That's something in our brain. It's not an objective property because the same thing will look different under different lighting and also like to different people. Like if we had a color deficient observer, they would see different colors in this room. So when we talk of color, we should talk of it as an perceptual property. And that's something I had not realized until I really delved into these basics of color with that. And all of my color knowledge comes from C.O.S.I, I would say.
Were there other research topics that you also studied or other places that you also went around?
Yes, I had a summer internship at Olympus in Japan. There I was very much interested in signal processing and also trying to link this back to my cybersecurity interest for analyzing the images of biological tissues and identifying aliveness. So what is a real human tissue and what comes from a dummy plastic or something. And this also became relevant later in my PhD when I was working on computer graphics topics, because human skin is one of the most challenging things to render artificially. These days, generative models, AI-based models become increasingly better, but still human skin is very peculiar. It's highly translucent, and if you don't get translucency right, it looks plasticky. You immediately notice something is wrong there.
You had an interest in cybersecurity, which you pivoted to color science, but specifically to medical imagery. And then you went to cell and human skins. But then you ended back to material appearance for your PhD in Norway, and specifically with the Colourlab. Do you remember how that came about?
Yes, I do. It was not an easy decision because, again, as it was the case when I was looking for masters, I was applying different places. And I had several offers from France as well. But what impacted my decision were actually 3 factors. First, the topic. I had a couple of lectures, not very deep understanding of material appearance, but a few lectures from Professor Tominaga during my C.O.S.I studies. And I found it very interesting. Even though I'm a computer scientist, I also very much enjoy working with humans. And this was an excellent opportunity to balance between the two, remain in computer science and algorithms, all the computational calculations, but also work with human observers, talk with humans, interact with them, and understand our bodies, how our visual system functions. Topic-wise, it was the most fascinating one. Second factor was the lab and my supervisors, especially John, Professor Hardeberg, with whom I had worked before, because he was also my master thesis supervisor. And I knew the lab, I knew the people, and I enjoyed working with them. So there was not much change coming back here after the US. And the third factor was the country, because when I came here, I fell in love with Norway. I enjoyed the environment. So I thought this is the place where I prefer living.
I'm learning a lot from you, Dr. Davit. But let's take a small break. back with Dr. Davit. So, Dr. Davit, you talked about your experience traveling to the US and to Japan, and could you give us a little bit of information about how this came about? Was it something that you did as part of your PhD or as part of some other research exchanges? So how does that work?
Actually, after going to both of these countries during my master's, I was very lucky to have the opportunity to return there in my PhD and then later in my postdoc. So we had a very privileged opportunity to have the project from the Research Council of Norway, which was called MANNER, Material Appearance Network for Education and Research. And that enabled us to have short-term research stays in different partner countries. And right now, actually, by the way, as a side note, after the end of the project, we established MANNER as a professional network. So right now we have this network of professionals interested in material appearance, and we try to arrange different activities, at least one conference a year, where we have different papers and sessions on material appearance. So if you're interested, you can Google for MANNER. But as for my mobilities, I went first to Yale University during my PhD, and I had huge pleasure to work with a computer graphics laboratory there under Holly Rushmeyer's supervision. And the topic I worked on was equally fascinating. So I hypothesized that translucency affects glossiness. So when we talk of these attributes, they don't exist in isolation. They all impact each other. For instance, color may impact gloss, and darker objects may look glossier than lighter ones because all these reflections stand out better because of a higher contrast. And when we talk about gloss, there are different hypotheses what kind of regularities or statistics in the image tell our brain that something is glossy. But then my hypothesis was that, okay, but these intensities in the image come not only from the surface, even though gloss is thought of as a surface property, but also they can come from the subsurface inside the material and affect overall how bright, light, or dark different parts look. And then I tested this hypothesis with the group at Yale. We conducted experiments and found very interesting indications in the data that translucency indeed affects how glossy something appears. And my time at Yale was really fantastic because, it's a huge university, and you have a first-hand experience of American academic culture that I already had a little bit of from UW in Seattle. And also you feel that you're part of something huge, like just resources, all the museums, the art gallery is fantastic, which has paintings from really some of the greatest painters in history. And my favorite part on campus was actually pretty a coincidence, was related also to translucency, because they have this Beinecke rare book and manuscript library where they have all very precious old books, for instance, a copy of Gutenberg Bible and such. And the building, I always show that in my lectures, is entirely made of translucent marble. And when you look at it from outside, it looks completely opaque. And when you're inside the building, some parts, it's exactly the same type of marble. Some parts look opaque, and some parts really glow, shine. And that can tell you where exactly the sun is, because when the sun hits the marble, you see translucency shining through the material, while when it's not the direct sunlight, this diffuse light does not penetrate deep enough to see it from inside. So part of the building starts to really glow and shine. So it was really interesting and memorable experience.
Wow.
The second mobility was to Chiba University in Japan after finishing my PhD. This was already during my postdoc, where the group there, Archeological Lab, developed an algorithm to manipulate bumpiness in the images. So if you have an image with different like surfaces and their different bumpiness levels, you have an algorithm to virtually change how bumpy it appears to human eye. And then I came there with my project that maybe this can also, this kind of manipulation and signal processing in different frequency domains can affect translucency, and we explored how this tool can be used also to modulate perceived translucency. And that was also a very, very valuable experience also to have some sort of experience from European academic culture, Japanese one, and the American one, like all three continents with different approaches, but equally fascinating topics and also excellence in science.
Now that you brought it up, I would like to know, since I assume you would be the best person to answer this, is there a very visible or something that stands out in research culture among the three places that you mentioned?
I think there is, for instance, Japan, and I believe this is the case for many countries in Asia, is more hierarchical, while in Norway we have very flat hierarchy between the professors and students. On the other hand, what I especially loved in Japan was that the students, master students, had their own offices and they came to the lab daily as our PhD students do. So they were taking this at a level of seriousness as a job, as an employment, which I totally loved. We have a lab and office for different master students. Here, you don't see students a lot unless they have a lecture or unless they have an experiment in the lab.
Right. Okay. What about in the US?
And the US is also interesting because they, in my impression, is that they do absolutely excellent research, top quality research. But on the other hand, the work-life balance is not as good as in Norway. In Norway, you see how much people appreciate the family time off, free time, while there, my impression from the time spent there is that people work more and there is slightly less room for work-life balance. But on the other hand, just being on campus, campus culture is totally different dimension there. Here, university is not really noticeable to that level, and there is not that much university identity, while in the US, this campus culture, people live on campuses and just you see all these like merge and college teams and everything all around. So university as an identity is a lot more visible. For instance, funny thing that I remember from Seattle is that Husky Stadium, their college football stadium of the university, has a bigger capacity than the national stadium in my country where national team plays.
Wow.
So this college sports and just belongingness to the university is a lot more visible, where you feel as a part of the team, a bit more than here.
Very fascinating. I think it's been more recently you've also been working towards cultural heritage restoration.
Yeah, it's more cultural heritage restoration, conservation, and from our perspective, imaging, because we do the imaging job. This is consistent with my interest in image processing, signal processing, hyperspectral imaging, and actually imaging and color and spectral are very relevant for cultural heritage in terms of digitization, measurement, restoration. And we had this very nice opportunity to be part of a project led by the University of Oslo. And these days you see this trend, like research really needs to be interdisciplinary to succeed in many different cases, because us computer or color scientists do not have enough competence to fully understand cultural heritage, while cultural heritage professionals, archaeologists, conservators have a limited understanding of all the opportunities that computer science and advance in machine learning and imaging techniques give to them. So there is then this creates a huge room for synergy between these communities. And I was invited to join this project, which is called TexRec. Right. It's a huge project for conservation and reconstruction of Viking Age textiles. And there are different groups working on like chemistry side, on archaeological interpretation. And my role and our teams like from the Colourlab role was computer science, imaging, and using this to put the broken parts together using computer science.
Again, very important, in my opinion, research topic that you've been working on. If I understand correctly, you've also been doing a lot of teaching and supervision during your role as a postdoc at the Colourlab. Was that something you chose, or was that something part of your university life at NTNU?
Yeah, that's correct. In addition to my research, I did a lot of other things, teaching, a bit of administration and management of projects, also representation and advocacy that we may talk about later. And this was, technically, this is labeled as a duty work, which department covers, and you should do some job for the department. But to be honest, this did not feel a duty. Honestly, this was a pleasure because I enjoy teaching, and I believe that teaching and research are perfectly complementing each other to make sure that both parts are up to date and relevant. In my case, it was exactly that way, especially because I was involved in research-based teaching. Every semester we had research projects that the students had to take up. And for me, first of all, it was great networking opportunity and meeting all the new C.O.S.I students and having this network with like future color and imaging scientists. But also at the same time, for me as a person and a researcher, this was a great learning experience. Because if you want your material to be relevant, you should keep up with the state of the art. You should read new papers, the new knowledge, and include it in your slides. And this is also somewhat like an infinite loop, because you take the state of the art, current papers, teach it to the students, and then you do the research project with the students, you create new knowledge, and then you update and enrich the knowledge status in the field. So next year, it's not only papers by other people, but it's your own papers written by your students last year that can be taught to the next generation of color and imaging scientists. So that was a perfect loop. And also, it kept me in the form because when the students are asking a lot of questions that you may never think about, and that really forces you to search for it, to think differently. They ask tricky questions that you had never considered before, and I believe one very important characteristic for a good teacher is not to be afraid of saying, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And there were cases where I didn't know, but then I made the research, I learned something myself, I read papers on that exact question, and next day I brought the answer along with the literature and the data supporting my answer. I believe this is a great opportunity to contribute to growing new generations of researchers, but also to grow yourself as a researcher.
You are an interesting case study with this particular thing because you were at the Colourlab or associated with the Colourlab as a master's student, then as a PhD student, as a postdoc, and then also as a supervision or lecturer. What do you think was the biggest realization when you switched over from being a student to being someone who looks over or handles students?
To me, the biggest difference was the amount of freedom, academic freedom. When you're a student, you have a very strict schedule. You have courses to take and you have to pass them, do the project within weeks and write an exam. And when you are a PhD, you have more freedom to explore the things that you're curious about. But as a student myself, that I had just graduated, I knew how challenging is it to work on, like when you're a student, you need to multitask more because you have projects on completely different topics. You have one on medical imaging and deep learning and another one on human visual perception, and you need to do both maybe the same day. So I know that they are very limited in time, and as a student, it's not always easy to manage time properly, and there is a lot happening, and you want to have fun, you want to go to parties, and you want to go hiking. And myself as a student, I did many things last minute and the night before the exam, and pulling an all-nighter before the exam. So knowing this, being in the shoes of a student, I tried to encourage my students to not to fall in that trap, to start working early, make decisions early, and keep working consistently to make their lives easier last minute. Because in research, you may learn a lot of formulas last minute and write an exam, but in research, you can't do that. You can't conduct experiments with 20 people in 2 hours. You need several months to prepare, collect information, collect data, analyze them. So my advice was that start early, keep working, set milestones, and set the deadlines. And I think in the end, we managed to succeed with that. And myself, from my own research perspective, then first as a PhD and then as a postdoc, the fundamental difference when I switched between PhD and postdoc was that in PhD, you have this pressure to publish as soon as possible, the stress that there is this huge milestone that at some point you have to defend. And if your contract ends and you don't defend, you don't get your doctorate, so you can't close this chapter. So this is very stressful thinking of that. And when I started my postdoc, I felt very relieved that there was no end point that, okay, here I need to defend after this amount of time. However, when I was approaching my postdoc, I realized that there was something even more problematic, that now I did not have to defend anything, but I had to find a permanent job, which is a lot more challenging and stressful when ending the postdoc and looking for permanent roles and moving from temporary to permanent employment.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. That's very interesting with these differences. But I know for a fact that you have been probably one of the most available and active member for supervision of master thesis and master projects. So, in your opinion, what makes a successful supervision between someone in your capability as a PhD or a postdoc working with a master's student? Because you already mentioned it's advantageous for you to learn from them or to update yourself for your supervision. But what do you think makes this relationship the most productive for both sides in your experience?
I believe that there is no one-size-fits-all solution here. So all theses and projects and supervisor-student relationships are different. But one thing that I want to emphasize, what makes a successful thesis and makes it different from unsuccessful one, is having a good plan, but being agile and keeping the healthy dose of flexibility. What I mean here, is that if you are way too flexible, it's very tempting when you do research to lose focus, because there are new questions that come up and a lot of interesting side quests that you want to follow, and you want to try this and that and this and implement this and answer that question. And in the end, you run out of time and you don't have anything specific. It's too broad. While on the other extreme, if you are too strict with your plan, you may end up in a dead end, because you never know what approach works. There can be never ever in my career has there been a project where everything went according to a plan. There is always some unforeseen obstacles and delays, something that may depend on you, but there are things that do not really depend on you and it's beyond your control. For example, you want to reproduce someone's source code and the author doesn't reply for 2 months, and then you should have a risk assessment and some priority plan. Okay, what happens in that case? What do you do? And then if you run out of time, you should have the list of priorities. Okay, if this doesn't work, what should I do next? What can be the workaround? What is more important task and less important task? And if you have a good understanding and awareness of that you should be flexible and be ready for changes while still remaining on the main track, I think in the end it will lead to a successful result and defense.
You mentioned just now about your struggles as a postdoc to feel like you're always a temporary worker and not having a permanent job at academia. I know that you've also been involved with a lot of advocacy. Is there something specific that led you there? Is it this uncertainty about job, or were there more concepts that you thought needed to be talked about?
I first started as a doctoral representative locally at NTNU with DION. And in the end, I spent 4 non-consecutive terms at DION. And then I moved to SiN, which is a national umbrella organization for PhD and early career rights. And my first steps in DION were just motivated by pure curiosity to see how things work from inside. But then my time there led me to a realization that not everyone is as lucky as me, because I've been very happy with my relationship with my supervisors and with my work here. But on the other hand, it's tricky then when you are in a nice position not to look at the world through rose-tinted glasses, because being there as an advocate of PhD candidates, I witnessed a lot of cases of harassment, having PhDs with very frustrating conflicts with their supervisors, and PhDs and temporary employees struggling against the system. We're struggling with mental health issues. And the more time I spent there, I understood how serious and important and essential this job was. And that's why I, in the end, decided to move a step up and work not only locally at NTNU, but also on the national level to support interests of early career researchers. On the one hand, the PhDs are, in my opinion, the most hardworking group who drive all the innovation and research and do all the hands-on work in the lab, while on the other hand, they are most vulnerable. Like these days, you see a lot of buzzwords like becoming efficient, cutting costs, and all of this comes at the expense of PhDs, because for universities, it's a lot easier to save money by hiring less PhDs than firing permanent staff. And for instance, in the last 3 years, 1 in every 7 PhD positions in Norway disappeared.
Wow.
And what adds to this vulnerability is precarity and uncertainty about future, because this comes with the temporariness in academia. When you're a student, you have less things to worry about. You can have fun, you can travel, but PhD in Norway is a full-time employee with employment rights. And also age-wise, this is a time when people start to settle down, start families, take out mortgage. And when you're temporarily employed and you don't know whether you will have salary next year, this uncertainty really affects their lives and their mental health.
Thank you for all the work you've done there. But during your time at SiN, what do you think stood out to you the most in terms of what is going right in Norway and what really needs to be brought into attention more?
That's a very interesting question, and I would be happy to summarize a few things from my SiN experience. Despite all the challenges and occasional hypocrisy you see in the system and many shortcomings, I still believe that Norway is one of the best, if not the best countries in the world to do the PhD, because here PhD candidates are employees, regular employees. They are not students. And first of all, they get salary. In other countries, it's actually pretty paradoxical that you do work as a PhD and you pay the tuition to the university, which is not the case here. So PhDs have income. They have then pension scheme contributions. They have all the social security with compensated sick and parental leaves. And after their thesis submission, they are eligible for unemployment benefits. So they can really enjoy all the benefits that come with being an actual employee at the university. And this compensated PhD work is a really privileged opportunity. Furthermore, it's now declining, but still Norway has more opportunities for mobility to do high quality research. There are still projects and funds to really support your research and career development activities. And another thing is that in general, despite again many cases of power abuse and intellectual harassment from the position of power, still overall the social hierarchy remains flat, and PhDs find some higher levels in the academic hierarchy more approachable than in other countries. However, on the other hand, we shouldn't be satisfied with just this, and there is an insane amount of work that can be done and huge room to improve things. For instance, again, dimensioning of PhD education, how many positions should we have, how long it should be, because 3 years is not enough. Definitely, most people don't manage to finish in 3 years. And what happens after is a very big problem, because many PhDs who are outside of EEA struggle with their immigration status, their residence permits, their income, because unless they have their thesis submitted, they don't get unemployment benefits. And if they continue working on their thesis, this counts as education, and then Social Security doesn't pay any unemployment benefits, which puts them in extremely difficult conditions. Also, what makes things even worse is temporariness and the challenges to find permanent employment after the PhD. And on the news, you see a lot of articles asking a question why skilled workers are leaving Norway. And you hear politicians say that Norway wants to attract and retain the best talents. But in practice, due to all these regulations, we see that there are a lot of really unnecessary obstacles, bureaucratic obstacles that make it difficult for people to stay and survive here after their PhD. Another topic, important topic, is supervision and intellectual harassment. So intellectual harassment in a very broad sense is understood as making someone feel intellectually inferior, but in academic context, this comes when someone in the position of power, such as supervisor, abuses students' intellectual work and exploits their work, and, for example, some unfair authorship practicing, who owns the data, who publishes the data, whose name is there, and also quality of supervision. Now we collaborate with other Nordic organizations on the Nordic level to somehow have a common strategy for improving doctoral supervision, because supervisor training is a sensitive topic. Some established researchers object to that. They think they have nothing to learn from it, because good supervisor is not only someone who knows their topic well and is a good researcher, but they need other transferable skills. They need to be a good psychologist and approachable persons, and they need empathy. They need to imagine themselves in the supervisee's shoes. And all these things need training, need some routine to evaluate what is a good supervision. That's another issue that SiN is dealing with. Another one that I personally worked on is a fair compensation for advocacy work, because it was very heartbreaking. It felt like NTNU is destroying everything I've been building with my teammates at DION, because they halved the compensation for working at DION. And we saw, like, for the first time this year, there were fewer people running for DION board than there were open positions, which is understandable because people already struggle with their PhDs. They struggle with a lot of duties and tasks and personal issues. And when they work for DION, they expect to be compensated for this work. And when you have the compensation, this shows the attitude. So what I did with my team at SiN is we conducted the survey nationwide to see what are the compensation practices for doctoral representatives at different Norwegian institutions. And the main takeaway was that they are everywhere, almost everywhere, very undercompensated. And this is important work that needs more acknowledgement and visibility.
Thank you again, Davit, for all that you've done. And I hope some of these issues are brought into sharper focus by the good activities and all the great work that SiN has been doing, but also is taken up seriously by people in the decision-making capabilities everywhere. Lastly, I do want to also talk about the value of learning the language, because we are focusing a lot about research in Norway and PhD life in Norway. I remember we had a very big discussion about this a year and almost 2 years ago as well, when there were murmurs of all temporary researchers being asked to have at least a certain competency in Norwegian. And of course, if I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the provision was taken out. But what is your first biased, or your opinion about the provision of having people learn Norwegian when they come here as PhD researchers or temporary researchers? Your opinion about that. And the second question would be, do you see the value of having a Norwegian language proficiency for someone who researches in Norway, and what are the problems associated with that?
That's a big topic that SiN has been working on. And as you correctly pointed out, there was a regulation which obliged all PhDs and temporary researchers to take the mandatory amount of Norwegian language courses and to have the Norwegian tuition, which was very controversial and problematic. And SiN was very actively advocating against it, and we're very happy that this was removed, because our opinion and view on this, and my personal opinion, is the following. It's great, it's amazing, of course, and very important to speak the local language in a country where you live in. And if the PhDs want to learn the language, they should be given the opportunity to do so, and they should be offered the courses whenever there is an interest. But what is a problem is forcing this to the people, because they are, as I already mentioned, they are already struggling with their own research and personal family duties. They have too much on their plate, and sometimes these courses are extra burden, which delays their research significantly. And also, it takes huge resources to teach Norwegian in terms of time and money and human resources. That was not obvious and clear where this money should come from. And this is problematic for two things. First, it creates an inherent risk for discrimination, because if the employer knows that there is a Norwegian candidate who already speaks the language and a foreign candidate who needs to be taught the language, then the second one, the latter, takes a lot more resources. So the employer is inclined to discriminate against them because it's just extra hassle for them to offer these courses. And secondly, because I think those are adult, very smart and skilled people, and they know what is best for their future. So if they feel like staying in Norway, investing their time and life here, then they should have the opportunity to learn. But if they're leaving right after their PhD, then there is little use of learning the language, and this is a lot of wasted taxpayer money. So you use taxpayer money to teach a language to the people who leave the country forever. So my opinion is that this should be optional, available, accessible, but optional. In general, my conclusion on importance of the language would be that if you are sure that you're here for your PhD 3 or 4 years and you leave afterward and you will never look back, then there is little incentive to learn the language, because you have already enough to do in your PhD, and you can survive here using English because command of English is very good. However, if you intend staying here longer and having your life in Norway in a long-term perspective, then learning the language is essential, both for professional development, because even though many jobs can be done in English, employers still very much prefer people who are as fluent or at least have some command of Norwegian, because Norwegian is a language of social interactions. Many workplaces have Norwegian as the primary language, and it also it's easier to find a job that way because you are more attractive as a Norwegian speaker to employers. And also it's essential for making Norwegian friends. You can have international friends who speak only English, but if you want to settle here long term, you need some local network, and there Norwegian becomes essential. So that's one of the sad things about my 9 years here, is that most of the people I've made friends with at the Colourlab were temporary employees, and people come and go, and you build these relationships, you make friends with them, and then they are done with their research and they leave. And then you somehow lose this touch, and it's very sad and heartbreaking. So it's also essential to have the local social network at the same time. So in that sense, I very much recommend everyone to invest in learning Norwegian.
You've been here for over 9 years. What is it about Gjøvik and Norway in general that has attracted you to be here so long?
To be very honest, has not been easy to be in Gjøvik for 9 years. And what kept me happy and what made me still stay here were two things. First, my job, because it's super fascinating, and I am one of the lucky people who do for a living what they actually enjoy. And I loved the lab, my supervisor, and the colleagues whom I worked with. And it was fascinating to work on the topic that I was honestly curious about. And the second thing was opportunity to travel. So if you do a PhD here, go places, go to conferences, and if there is a research mobility, do it, experience something new, see something new. And I was very lucky to have traveled quite a few places throughout my PhD and postdoc, and that's a healthy dose of a break. You escape this quietness and cold winters and dark. You go to a very vibrant place, meet people, network there, enjoy many people on the street, and this is a perfect place to relax after that, because Gjøvik is very quiet and very cozy. You need a healthy balance between more vibrant places and Gjøvik. Summer is fantastic in Norway. Nature is very beautiful. You have almost 24 hours of daylight. There are limitless opportunities for you to go hiking and spend some time outdoor, which I very much enjoy. So there is a lot to do in summer, and the rest of the year you keep entertained by interesting job. But be prepared, it's not easy if you move to Norway from a country which is very vibrant with a lot of people, a lot of social interactions. It may feel a little bit hard in the beginning. Norway is still one of the best places to do your PhD. You will have a decent salary, you will have a healthy work-life balance, huge support to do high quality research. My advice would be to read about rights, because you have a lot of rights that you may not imagine coming from a different country. And one tricky thing is that no one may say that to you when you come here. No one really explains all these things to you. And read what are you entitled for, and negotiate your salary if you can before signing any contract, and proactively ask what the local resources are. There are things that are slightly hidden, so proactively search for them, proactively ask for resources and what organization is there for social activities, what organization you can approach to ask help, and so on.
Dr. Gigilashvili, thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey and for all the work you have done for the research community in Norway. Thank you for your time today and for sharing with us such an exciting journey you have had as a researcher in Norway, but also for all of the things that you've done for us. I can speak from personal experience that you were one of the most helpful and visible staff within our department and our Colourlab group when I first joined the PhD in the computer science department. Your work as the DION board member back then was probably the first time I actually found out about so many helpful resources that I, as a PhD, could have access to. And so I'm very, very grateful for all that you have done for our whole researcher community in NTNU, in Norway, but also speaking personally from the heart for my personal PhD journey as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Banu. Thanks for inviting, and I hope it was interesting.
It was, and I'm sure our listeners would agree with me in saying this is just such a fascinating conversation to listen to. And I actually hope we can have you back for some more discussions, because I know there's a lot of advocacy that you've done. And so there's so many things we haven't even scratched the surface of.
Sure, that would be my pleasure. And thanks for starting this podcast and this initiative. I think you're creating a very useful resource for people interested in doing their PhD or academic career in Norway. And I'm looking forward to your future episodes. Thank you.
Listeners, that was the second episode of PhD Life in Norway. Make sure to check out the links in our description to learn more about SIN, SiN, and your rights as a researcher in Norway. I hope we see you back for our next episode and the next discussions we have. Until then, take care.